The chamber fell silent as the emergency transmission crackled to life, overriding the Galactic Council's secure feed. Holograms of trade negotiations and territorial revisions blinked out, replaced by the blurred image of an aged Urani general. His breath came slow and ragged, but his eyes burned with the weight of 100 forgotten wars. "Do not go to war with Earth," he said. His voice, gravel wrapped in thunder, cut through the room like a blade. "You won't survive it!" Then the screen went black. Gasps filled the vacuum of stunned silence. Counselors from the Delpari tribes clutched their translator beads. The Tazcall, ever composed, shifted uncomfortably. Even the Kavari delegates, whose species evolved without vocal cords, emitted visible pulses of distress. At the center of the circular hall, High Commander Alara Vaz stood slowly, her armor catching the pale violet light of the central dome. "That transmission was unauthorized," she said, her tone ice over iron. "Vectal has not held rank for 20 years. His words carry no strategic weight. But they carry fear," murmured Admiral Yernox of the Solari Guard. "Fear is rarely born from fiction." Alara narrowed her eyes. "Then let me extinguish it." 3 levels below the council chamber, in a lesser-known hall repurposed as a Terran diplomacy outpost, Captain Elias Rain reviewed system logs from his outpost on Sotera Station. The voice from the intercepted feed still echoed in his mind. Vectel. He knew the name. Every human stationed off-Earth did. The Urani general had been a phantom in military history, a ghost whose final campaign during the Shadow Rift conflicts had ended in inexplicable silence. No reports. No survivors. Just wreckage discovered months later, Urani destroyers folded in on themselves like paper, and one unmistakable mark burned into the hull of a cruiser, property of Earth Defense Directive 7. Rain looked up as the door chimed. "Enter." It slid open to reveal a slender figure cloaked in the midnight blues of the Empire's intelligence arm. Her face was hidden beneath a veil of shimmercloth, but her posture screamed urgency. "Captain Rain," she said in fluent English. "I am known as Tarel. I bring you a warning, not from the Empire, but from those within it who remember." Elias gestured to the chair. "You're 5 minutes behind a ghost. Vectal already sent his message." Tarel sat, her movements precise. "And that message will be buried. Alara has ordered the deletion of the General's classified archives. She means to strike before memory can bloom into caution." Rain's jaw tightened. "She thinks we're still catching up. She believes you never will." Tarel leaned forward. "But the inner circle knows what she buries. They've seen the simulations, the ones that end in silence, not victory." Rain turned toward the stars beyond the glass wall. Mars gleamed in the distance, red and quiet. He spoke softly, not to her, but to the reflection staring back at him. "I was 12 when the Mandragora tried to breach Earth's orbital layer. We didn't send a fleet. We didn't send a message. We turned the moon's surface into a laser array and carved return home into their ships. 3 words. Thousands of tons of steel, shaped by silence." Tarel whispered. "The Empire remembers." "Then why this war?" "Because ambition forgets what history etched in blood." Far across the stars, on the decaying outer rim of the Urani Empire, General Vectal stood alone in a chamber lit only by dying starlight. The ancient war vault before him blinked once, then opened. Inside, relics, data slates, and one half-shattered holorecord. He activated it. Static cleared to show the last minutes of the Shadow Rift incursion. Human drones moved in silence, fluid, emotionless, mathematically perfect. Urani's ships collapsed not from impact, but from predictive overkill, strike vectors designed not to win battles, but to make war itself obsolete. Vectal watched as a younger version of himself screamed into a comms channel, begging for extraction, his fleet vanishing in bursts of white light. "They never knew what hit them," he muttered. The vault sealed with a soft hiss. Outside, Empire soldiers in polished armor waited. Vectal stepped into their circle without resistance. Alara's envoy approached. "You've committed treason, old one." "I've committed remembrance," he said. You'll commit extinction. Back on Earth, an encrypted message arrived at Defense Command. From Terran Outpost Sotera, Elias Rain. Priority, read. Subject, Empire War mobilization confirmed. Civil resistance likely within. Note, Vectal sent the warning. The galaxy won't listen. We should. Admiral Sohaila Tran stared at the screen. Her fingers drummed against the console before she uttered a single order. Activate the Ananke protocol. Prepare Earth. The vault's magnetic seals clicked into place, and General Vectal stood motionless before the sealed archive, his memories now recorded in data slates the Empire would soon incinerate. Outside, the skies above the Urani archives remained heavy, choked with blue-tinted cloud cover that never broke, as if even the atmosphere itself withheld judgment. He turned slowly to face the soldiers sent to arrest him. Their armor gleamed with imperial discipline, but their hands trembled beneath the gauntlets. "Do you understand what you're guarding?" he asked. The lead officer didn't answer. Orders were orders. High Commander Alara Vaz paced beneath the crystalline spire of the Empire's War Council dome. The chamber hummed with tension. Strategists, diplomats, and planetary governors filled the room with feigned composure. She stopped before a transparent command sphere showing the location of every known Terran defense satellite. Delete the transmission. Burn the logs. Strip the encryption. Make sure not a whisper remains, she ordered. Vice Admiral Lektu raised an eyebrow. And the vaults? Sealed. He's been escorted to the prison moons. Vectal's warnings die with him. Lektu hesitated. Some in the outer circle see him as a martyr. Silencing him may. Alara cut him off. Martyrdom only works when the subject dies clean. Vectal betrayed the Empire and sided with an inferior species. Let that rot in the public record. Across the room, a cloaked figure leaned toward Lektu. It was Tarel. Careful, she murmured. Burying warnings doesn't erase the threat. It only removes the map. Captain Elias Rain hadn't slept. His eyes, bloodshot and unblinking, scanned the transmission logs for anomalies. Somewhere in the flood of interstellar traffic, coded signals had begun weaving patterns. Nothing overt, just subtle shifts in frequency and rhythm. Tarel stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the holographic display of the Imperial fleet gathering near the Vega expanse. You still believe they'll listen? She asked. Elias exhaled slowly. They won't. Not until it's too late. But I need to know what Vectal saw, what made him break silence after decades. Tarel hesitated. I can get you into the restricted military archives. One session. One download. That's treason. It's clarity. She activated her implant, and the room shimmered. A brief pulse of blue light rewrote the access protocols. The archives flickered open, revealing a cache labeled Shadow Rift, Operation Eclipse, unredacted. The playback stuttered at first, broken data threads slowly merging into coherent video. A cold, muted battlefield emerged, space wreckage, charred fragments of Urani dreadnoughts, floating in silence. The logs were timestamped 70 years ago. The audio crackled with distant screams, then quieted as the feed zoomed toward a human fleet unlike anything the Empire had catalogued. No visible weapons. No conventional heat signatures. The ship's thought. Reacted. Predicted. Elias's jaw tightened. Neuralink units. We scrapped those after Geneva. Too unpredictable. Tarel shook her head. Not scrapped. Hidden. There's more. The scene changed. Inside one human command vessel, a captain issued no verbal orders. Instead, nodes lit up across his skull, his thoughts synchronizing with every ship, drone, and orbital mine. Within seconds, the Urani fleet was gone. No explosions. Just implosions, geometry bending, hulls collapsing at weak points found before the enemy even fired. A voice rang out over the human comms. Maintain the illusion. No survivors. No story. Elias leaned back, stunned. We didn't just beat them. We erased them. That's why Vectal stayed silent, Tarel said. He saw what humans are when no one is watching. Back in the Empire's central hub, Alara watched the fleet formations tighten across dozens of systems. War banners unfurled in subspace channels, and recruits flooded into cryocarriers. She admired the symmetry, the order. Lektu approached, pale. We received a breach alert. A file from the Shadow Rift logs was accessed by someone using diplomatic credentials, human credentials. Alara's voice dropped to a growl. Trace it. And Vectel? He asked quietly. In transit. Have him rerouted. No tribunal. No trial. You want him dead. I want him forgotten. On Earth, Admiral Sohaila Tran stared at the download from Elias. The room around her buzzed with restrained panic, analysts scrambling to verify the footage, generals whispering about preemptive action. Was this protocol ever authorized? She asked her aide. No. It was compartmentalized. Blackwatch level. Only 8 humans even knew it existed. Tran nodded slowly. Make it 9. She tapped a command into her console. 2. Terran Defense Grid, override clearance. From Admiral Sohaila Tran. Command, activate dormant sequence, Ghost Signal Protocol, Tier 6. Across Earth's outer defenses, ancient machines flickered back to life. In orbit around Vega, the Imperial fleet prepared its war drills. But deep within the ship Virexen's claw, an unnoticed beacon blinked red. A ghost had woken. The stars over Mars shimmered with a strange stillness as the Empire's forward fleet breached Terran borders. No warning signals. No fighter escorts. Just quiet. 1,000 warships hung in synchronized formation, waiting for an enemy that refused to show its face. Aboard the Imperial flagship Virexen's Claw, Commander Alara Vaz stood before the viewing pane, arms folded behind her back. The red planet rotated slowly below, indifferent. They don't even raise shields, her tactical officer muttered. Alara didn't answer. She stared into the silence like it insulted her. On Earth, buried beneath kilometers of smart stone and kinetic shielding, the Terran War Council convened. Admiral Sohaila Tran arrived last, her presence rippling through the room like a dropped stone in still water. Her gaze swept over the gathered officials, military minds, quantum theorists, and the last 2 remaining survivors of Protocol Eclipse. She spoke without greeting. The Empire has arrived. No one gasped. No one flinched. They had been waiting. A hologram bloomed at the center of the room, fleet schematics, known troop movements, and a 1:1 map of Mars' orbit rendered in photonic detail. They haven't fired, said Dr. Halden, Chief of Defensive AI Integration. Tran nodded. Because they think we're bluffing. And we're not? He asked. No, said Elias Rain, stepping into the circle. We just don't need to fire first. In the Virexen's Claw's command deck, the static began. At first, it was a low, ambient hum, barely above the range of hearing. Then came the images. Screens flickered, showing grainy footage of charred Imperial hulls and empty cockpits. Alara's eyes narrowed as the ship's interface resisted commands. Control inputs froze, navigational logs rewrote themselves, and external comms began broadcasting an eerie message on loop. We asked for peace. You insisted on purpose. She turned toward the communications officer. Shut it down. I can't, he stammered. It's not coming from Earth. It's coming from us. Explain. Our core systems are generating the signal. It's like something speaking through our own code. On Earth, Elias stood before the command interface, watching the automated breach counters light up. They've tripped the lattice, he said. Phase 1? Admiral Tran asked. Already done. The lattice was embedded in their systems during last decade's medical aid missions. The tech we gave them, biocircuitry, neural translators, fleet telemetry modules, they weren't gifts. They were keys. Keys to silent doors that no one had noticed until they were already inside. Back on Virexen's Claw, panic simmered beneath the crew's formal discipline. The stars outside began to shift, only slightly, but enough for the trained eye. Stellar positions blinked out of sync. Gravity sensors trembled, recalibrating every few seconds. Then, without warning, the solar feed inverted, turning Mars black and Earth white-hot on every spectral scanner. "What are they doing?" the helmsman whispered. "They're not doing anything," Alara said coldly. "This is a message. A performance." Inside Earth's command chamber, Admiral Tran remained unmoving. "They're disoriented. Their star maps are off by half a degree. It'll look like reality is bending," Halden said, eyes locked on the simulation. "It's the ghost arrays," Elias explained. "Old Terran satellites, long dead to anyone scanning for heat or motion. But they can still refract localized gravity. Just enough to create optical chaos. And now?" Tran finally turned from the display. "Now we show them the god behind the curtain." Back on the Imperial flagship, silence cracked. A new transmission hijacked every screen, every visor, every neural implant. It showed a single Terran child standing barefoot in the snow, reciting an old poem. "We are the children of stone and storm, forged in fires you never felt, raised on silence sharper than steel. And when we speak, planets kneel." The child's eyes glowed faintly. No technology visible. No threat in her hands. But in every sensor log, every scanner, every predictive algorithm, the same alert flashed: unknown entity, threat level, total. Alara slammed her fist into the console. "Stand by for orbital barrage." But her command was met with silence. Every gunship, every missile bay, every engine coil, dead. Admiral Tran watched the fleet drift helplessly across her screen. "Do we strike?" Halden asked. "No," she replied. "Let the message settle." Elias stepped forward. "The moment they fire, we end them. But as long as they watch, they learn." "Will they understand?" Halden asked. Tran smiled faintly. "They'll understand that we haven't been quiet out of weakness. We've been quiet because they weren't worth the sound." In the black between Mars and Earth, the Empire's fleet spun slowly, like puppets cut from their strings, caught in a silence louder than any war cry. Back on the prison moon, General Vectal stared up at the flickering stars beyond his cell. A low tremor passed through the walls. He closed his eyes. "They woke it," he whispered. "And it didn't even need to speak." The Empire's fleet floated dead in Terran orbit, not from war, but paralysis. Their systems hadn't been destroyed, just repurposed. Redirected. And worst of all, predicted. In silence, humanity had rehearsed for this moment 1,000 times. No one on Varexen's claw spoke. Not even Alara. The voice returned. This time, it was not a poem or a child. It was the voice of Earth itself, calm, steady, unmistakably human. "You crossed our border with fire. We answered with mirrors. Not because we feared you, but because we wanted you to see yourselves." High above Earth, Admiral Sohaila Tran stood with her arms behind her back, the Terran defense grid purring quietly below the surface. Elias Rain was at her side, his gaze fixed on the ghost-white dots of frozen Imperial vessels still shimmering on the command board. "They haven't retreated," Elias noted. "They're still calculating how this happened," Tran replied. "Let them. There's no war to win, only a lesson to digest." He gave her a sidelong glance. "And if they don't learn? We don't teach twice." In the throne world of Kael'vor, the Imperial court spiraled into chaos. Alara stood before the High Triarchs, her uniform torn from a hastily issued tribunal. Lines of code, extracted logs from the fleet's failed incursion, flashed behind her as evidence of total systemic collapse. "You led us into disgrace," spat Triarch Vendor, his serpentine form coiling with fury. "And you dismissed a warning from a decorated general." "I followed protocol," Alara snapped. "We couldn't afford fear. You couldn't afford truth." From the shadows, another voice spoke. Vectal stepped forward. Once believed exiled, the general now wore the black robes of Witness Emeritus, an ancient title, long thought symbolic. But it still granted him one power: to testify before the throne unquestioned. He bowed. She was warned. You all were. Vendor sneered. And you, betrayer of our doctrine, what would you have us do? Bow to humans? Vectal didn't flinch. No. You never understood. Humans don't want us to kneel. They want us to understand why they never had to. Aboard Varexen's claw, the systems flickered back to life. Bit by bit, weapon controls disengaged from their overrides. Power returned to engines. Visual clarity restored. But every terminal now bore the same closing message. You are free to leave. We are free to remember. The fleet turned, slowly, deliberately, away from Mars. No ceremony. No retaliation. Just surrender. Admiral Tran watched the retreat unfold, a flicker of emotion in her otherwise steel expression. Halden turned to her. Should we document a formal victory? She shook her head. There was no war. Only a demonstration. Elias folded his arms, voice low. Do you think they'll come back? Not soon, she said. But one day, someone always forgets. He nodded, looking through the observation panel at Earth, scarred, unyielding, beautiful. Then we'll remember for them. On the Empire's outer rim, propaganda channels ran silent. There were no songs of conquest, no parades of valor. Only a new addition to the military curriculum, the Terran engagement, case study in tactical misdirection and psychological supremacy. Cadets whispered of neurofleets. Of children trained as living algorithms. Of a planet that bled in silence and forged its vengeance in patience. And somewhere, far from the polished halls of Kael'vor, a young Imperial boy sat cross-legged in front of a learning terminal. He rewound the footage again, watching as the human child in snow spoke her final verse. He didn't feel fear. He felt awe. Back on Earth, Elias walked alone along the outer wall of the Black Mount Citadel. Snowflakes caught in his collar. The silence felt earned. He stopped when Admiral Tran joined him. There'll be no medal, she said softly. Didn't ask for one. No anthem. No monument. He smiled faintly. Good. That's how it should be. She looked up at the stars, then to him. You stayed calm. Even when the Empire was in orbit. Elias shrugged. They never scared me. Why? Because I was there during the Mandragora siege. I saw a 12-year-old girl rebuild an entire targeting grid from her hospital bed using a neural pen in sheer spite. Tran chuckled. Spite? He nodded. Our real weapon. Not steel. Not ships. Just human stubbornness. Inside a quiet Terran archive, a new plaque was mounted on the wall. Here stood the day war did not come. Dedicated to those who fight by remembering what must never be repeated. The lights dimmed. The archive sealed. Earth rested. But it did not sleep.